The iron bars had been her sky for as long as Grisha could remember, crisscrossed shadows that moved across the stone floor as the sun she had never seen traveled its invisible path above the prison. She was born in this cell, delivered by her mother's trembling hands in the darkness of the human fortress, and when her mother died 3 winters later, Grisha remained alone in the depths where no light truly reached. The guards told her she was a monster, that her green skin and small tusks marked her as something less than human, something that deserved the chains and the cold and the endless stone walls that pressed in from every direction. 20 years she had lived in that cell. 20 years of stale bread pushed through the bars, of water that tasted like rust, of voices that spoke to her only to curse or threaten. She knew the exact number of stones in her walls because she had counted them 10,000 times. She knew the pattern of footsteps that meant a guard was coming, the difference between the boots of the warden and the lighter steps of the cook's boy, who sometimes whispered apologies when he brought her food. She knew cold and hunger and the particular kind of loneliness that came from being the only one of her kind in a place that hated what she was. But she did not know warmth. She did not know kindness. And she had never, not once in her entire life, seen the sky. The morning everything changed began like any other. Grisha woke on her thin blanket in the corner of her cell, her body aching from the cold stone floor, her stomach already twisting with the familiar emptiness that never quite went away. She could hear the prison waking around her, the groans of other prisoners in distant cells, the clanging of gates being opened and closed, the shuffle of guards changing shifts. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and waited for the bread that would come eventually, the single meal that kept her alive for another day. But instead of the cook's boy, she heard different footsteps, heavier, purposeful, and more than one set. She lifted her head, her pointed ears catching the sound of keys jangling, of low voices speaking in tones she could not quite make out. Then the door to the lower cells swung open with a groan that echoed through the stone corridors, and torchlight spilled down the stairs like liquid gold. "This is madness, Captain," one voice said, sharp with disapproval. "She's an orc. She belongs in chains." "She's a prisoner who has served a sentence she never deserved," another voice answered, and this one was different, deeper, calmer. It carried a weight that made even the stone seem to listen. 20 years for the crime of being born. That ends today. Grisha pressed herself against the back wall of her cell, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had learned long ago not to hope, not to expect anything but cruelty from the humans who controlled her fate. But something in that second voice made her chest tighten in a way she did not understand. The footsteps came closer. 3 men appeared before her cell, their faces illuminated by the torch one of them carried. The first was the warden, a thick-necked man with cold eyes who had overseen her captivity for the past decade. The second was a guard she recognized, young and nervous, his hand resting on the sword at his hip. The third was a stranger. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the bearing of a soldier, though he wore no armor. His hair was dark brown, cut short in the military fashion, and his face was weathered in a way that spoke of years spent outdoors, under the sun and wind. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were gray, like the stone walls around her, but where the stone was cold and dead, his eyes were alive with something she could not name. He looked at her not with hatred or disgust, but with a kind of careful assessment that made her feel seen for the first time in her life. "This is her?" he asked, his gaze never leaving Grisha's face. "That's the orc," the warden confirmed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Born in this cell 20 years ago. Her mother was a prisoner of war, died when the creature was still young. We've kept her locked up ever since. too dangerous to release. Dangerous? The stranger's voice was flat, almost disbelieving. She's been chained in a cell her entire life. What possible threat could she pose? She's an orc, the warden repeated as if that explained everything. They're violent by nature, savage, can't be trusted among decent folk. The stranger was silent for a long moment, his eyes still on Grisha. She stared back at him, her small tusks pressing against her lower lip, her hands clutching the threadbare blanket. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. She had learned long ago that speaking only made things worse. "Open the cell," the stranger said finally. The warden's face went red. "Captain Sorenson, I must protest. The order you carry may give you authority here, but releasing an orc into the kingdom is— I'm not asking for your opinion," Captain Sorenson interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. "I'm giving you an order. Open the cell." The guard fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he sorted through the iron ring. It took him 3 tries to find the right one, and when the lock finally clicked open, the sound echoed through the cell like a gunshot. Grisha flinched, her body tensing for whatever punishment was coming. They were going to move her to a different cell, perhaps, or chain her in some new way. Nothing good ever came from the guards opening her door, but Captain Sorenson did not reach for chains. Instead, he stepped into the cell, moving slowly, his hands held out where she could see them. "My name is Rowan Sorenson," he said, his voice gentle now. "I'm here because the new king has ordered a review of all prisoners held without trial. Your case was brought to his attention. You were imprisoned for being born, Grisha. That's not justice. That's cruelty." She blinked at him, confused. No one had spoken her name with anything but scorn in years. Hearing it said so plainly, so respectfully, made something crack inside her chest. "I have an order for your release," Rowan continued. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, sealed with red wax. "You're free to go." The words made no sense. Free. She did not know what that word meant in any practical way. She had been a prisoner her entire life. The cell was all she knew, the bars and the stone and the darkness. What was she supposed to do with freedom? "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. She rarely spoke aloud anymore, there being no one to speak to. "Where would I go?" Rowan's expression softened. "That's a fair question. You have no family, no home, no coin. Releasing you without support would be no kindness at all." He paused, and something shifted in his eyes, a decision being made. "I own a farm about 2 days' ride from here, near the eastern border. It's not much, but there's land and a house and work that needs doing. If you want, you can come with me. I'll give you employment, a place to stay, and wages for your labor. You'll be free to leave whenever you choose, but at least you won't be cast out with nothing." Grisha stared at him. She searched his face for the cruelty, the trick, the hidden trap that would snap shut around her the moment she let herself believe. But she found nothing but steady patience in those gray eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Rowan said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control. My brother was an orc sympathizer during the war. He believed the conflict was built on lies and prejudice. He was executed for treason when I was 16. I've spent the years since trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand what justice actually means. When I saw your name on the list of prisoners, I knew I had to come." The warden made a disgusted sound. "Bleeding heart nonsense. She'll gut you in your sleep, Captain." "They all do, given half a chance." Rowan ignored him. He kept his eyes on Grisha, waiting. "The choice is yours," he said. "You can stay here if you want, or you can take a chance on something different. Either way, you're free. The king's order is absolute." Grisha looked down at her hands. They were green and calloused, the fingers thicker and stronger than a human woman's would be. She had always hated them, these hands that marked her as different, as wrong. But they were her hands. They were all she had. She thought about the cell. About spending another day, another year, another decade in this darkness. About dying here as her mother had died, without ever knowing what the world beyond these walls looked like. She thought about the sky. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan nodded as if he had expected nothing less. "Then let's get you out of here." He offered her his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a command. Grisha hesitated. She had never touched another person with kindness. Every hand that had ever reached for her had held a weapon or chains. But Rowan waited, patient and still, and finally she reached out and placed her hand in his. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, and his grip was gentle but firm as he helped her to her feet. Her legs shook. She had not stood for more than a few minutes at a time in years, and her body was weak from poor food and no sunlight. Rowan steadied her, his hand moving to her elbow to keep her upright. "Easy," he said. "Take your time. We're not in a hurry." The warden was still sputtering protests, but Rowan paid him no attention. He guided Grisha out of the cell, through the door she had seen opened and closed 1,000 times but had never passed through. The corridor beyond was narrow and dark, lined with more cells, most of them empty. The few prisoners who remained pressed their faces to the bars to watch her go, their expressions ranging from shock to anger to something that might have been envy. They climbed stairs. So many stairs. Grisha's breath came in gasps, her legs burning with the effort, but Rowan matched his pace to hers, never rushing, never complaining. The air grew warmer as they ascended, less damp, and she could smell things she had no names for, scents that were neither stone nor rust nor her own unwashed body. At last they reached a heavy wooden door. Rowan pushed it open and light flooded in. Grisha cried out and stumbled backward, her hands flying up to shield her eyes. The brightness was agony, a searing white pain that stabbed into her skull. She had seen torchlight and lamplight, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the sheer, overwhelming intensity of natural light. "I'm sorry," Rowan said quickly, and she felt his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "I should have thought. You've never seen daylight before. Keep your eyes closed for now. Let me get you outside and we'll take it slow." She nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down her face from the shock of the light. Rowan's hand stayed on her shoulder, guiding her forward. She felt a threshold pass beneath her feet, and then the quality of the air changed. It moved. It carried smells that were green and alive, and she could hear sounds that were not echoes, not contained by walls. The world opened up around her in a way that made her dizzy. "We're outside now," Rowan said softly. "The prison yard. There's no one else here. It's very early, just before dawn. In a few minutes the sun will start to rise. But right now the light is gentle. Do you think you can try to open your eyes, just a little?" Grisha's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She was terrified. But beneath the terror was something else, something that felt like hunger but sharper, more desperate. She wanted to see. She needed to see slowly, so slowly she lowered her hands. She kept her eyes squeezed shut for another moment, gathering her courage, and then she opened them to the smallest slits. The world was gray and soft, the light dim enough that it did not hurt. She could make out shapes, the dark mass of the prison wall behind her, the open space of the yard stretching out ahead, and beyond that, something vast and formless that her mind could not quite grasp. She opened her eyes a little wider, blinking against the tears and the strangeness, and slowly, slowly the world came into focus. The sky was above her. It was huge. Impossibly, terrifyingly huge. It stretched from one edge of her vision to the other with no walls to contain it, no ceiling to mark its limits. It was the color of slate, with streaks of lighter gray where clouds caught the pre-dawn light, and it seemed to go on forever, up and up and up until her mind rebelled against the scale of it. Grisha's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cold ground, her eyes locked on the sky, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. It was too much. The openness, the space, the sheer, endless expanse of it made her feel like she was falling upward, like the ground would lose its hold on her, and she would tumble into that vast grayness and be lost forever. Rowan crouched beside her. He did not try to make her stand, did not tell her to calm down. He simply stayed close, a solid presence in the overwhelming chaos of new sensation. "Breathe," he said quietly. "You're safe. I know it's frightening, but you're safe." "It's so big," Grisha choked out. I didn't know it would be so big." "I know," Rowan said. "But look. Look to the east." He pointed, and Grisha forced herself to follow his hand. At the edge of the sky, where it met the dark line of distant hills, the gray was lightening. A strip of color was beginning to appear, a pale, delicate gold that grew brighter even as she watched. "The sun is rising," Rowan said. "Watch." Grisha watched. She could not have looked away if she had tried. The gold spread, deepening into orange and pink, and the clouds caught fire with color. The gray sky began to turn blue, a soft, tentative blue at first, then richer, deeper, until it was the color of something precious, something she had no word for. And then the sun itself appeared, a burning edge of brilliance that crept above the hills and spilled light across the world. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was the only beautiful thing she had ever seen. She sat there in the dirt of the prison yard, her face tilted up to the dawn, and she wept. The tears poured down her cheeks, hot and unchecked, and she did not try to stop them. She cried for the 20 years she had lost, for the mother who had died in the darkness, for the child she had been who had never known that such beauty existed in the world. Rowan sat beside her and said nothing. He simply let her cry, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of her emotions. When her tears finally slowed, when her breathing steadied and the sobs faded to hiccups, he spoke. "Are you ready to go?" he asked. "My horse is waiting at the gate. We have a long ride ahead of us, but we'll take it at your pace." Grisha looked at him. His face was kind in the soft morning light, his gray eyes steady and patient. She did not trust him, not fully, not yet. Trust was not something she had any experience with, but she believed that he would not hurt her on purpose, and that was more than she had ever had before. "I'm ready," she said. Rowan helped her stand, and together they walked toward the prison gate. Grisha's legs were steadier now, though she moved slowly, her eyes constantly lifting to the sky as if to reassure herself that it was still there, still real. The guards at the gate stared at her with open hostility, their hands on their weapons, but Rowan's presence kept them from acting. He showed them the king's order, and they had no choice but to let them pass. Beyond the gate was a road, packed dirt that stretched away into the distance. Trees lined it, tall and green, their leaves rustling in a breeze that Grisha could feel on her skin for the first time. A horse was tied to a post nearby, a large bay gelding with a calm eye and patient stance. Rowan untied him and led him over to where Grisha stood. "This is Jasper," he said. "He's gentle. He'll carry us both without complaint, though it won't be the most comfortable ride you've ever had." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I suppose every ride is the most comfortable ride you've ever had, given the circumstances." Grisha blinked at him, and then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, but it felt good. Rowan's smile widened. "There we go," he said. "Come on, let's get you home." He mounted first, then extended his hand down to her. Grisha took it and let him pull her up behind him. She had never been on a horse before, and the height was dizzying, but Rowan was solid in front of her, and when Jasper began to walk, she found that the rocking motion was not unpleasant. The world unfolded around them as they rode. Grisha clung to Rowan's coat and stared at everything with wide eyes. The trees, the grass, the wildflowers growing along the roadside, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves and made patterns on the ground, the distant mountains that rose like giants against the blue sky. A bird flew overhead, and she gasped at the sight of it, at the impossible freedom of something that could move through the air itself. They rode for hours. Rowan stopped once to let her rest and eat, pulling bread and cheese from his saddlebags and sharing it with her without ceremony. The food was simple, but it was better than anything she had eaten in the prison, and she ate slowly, savoring every bite. Rowan watched her with an expression she could not quite read, something between sadness and determination. "I need to prepare you," he said as they sat beneath a tree, Jasper grazing nearby. "My farm is on the border, in a region where tensions between humans and orcs are still high. There was a settlement of orcs not far from my land until about 5 years ago, but they were driven out after a series of raids. Some people in the area will not be happy to see you. They'll assume the worst." Grisha's stomach tightened. "Will they hurt me?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," Rowan said firmly. "You're under my protection, and my word carries weight in those parts. I'm a veteran of the border wars, and I've earned a reputation as someone who keeps his promises and doesn't back down from trouble. But I won't lie to you. It will be difficult. You'll face prejudice, suspicion, maybe worse. If you want to change your mind, if you'd rather I take you somewhere else, somewhere further from the frontier, I'll do it. I want you to know that." Grisha considered this. She could ask him to take her somewhere safer, somewhere she would not be hated on sight. But she thought about the way he had spoken to the warden, the steel in his voice when he had demanded her release. She thought about the way he had waited for her to open her eyes to the dawn, patient and steady. This man had risked something to bring her out of that prison, and she did not want to ask him to risk more. "I'll go to your farm," she said. "I'll work for you, and I'll try not to cause trouble." Rowan shook his head. "You won't cause trouble just by existing, Grisha. If people have a problem with you, that's their failing, not yours. I want you to understand that." His words made her throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and they finished their meal in companionable silence. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, the landscape growing wilder as they left the roads near the prison behind. The cultivated fields gave way to rolling hills covered in tall grass, and the settlements became fewer and farther between. By the time the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made Grisha's chest ache with their beauty, they were alone on a narrow track that wound through a forest of pine and oak. "We'll camp here for the night," Rowan said, guiding Jasper off the path into a small clearing. "There's a stream nearby where we can get water, and the trees will give us some shelter if the weather turns." He helped Grisha down from the horse, and she stood on shaky legs, her body sore from the long ride. Rowan moved with practiced efficiency, unsaddling Jasper and tending to the horse before setting up their camp. He built a fire, coaxing flames from dry tinder with the ease of long experience, and soon the clearing was warm and bright. Grisha sat close to the fire, mesmerized by the way the flames danced and flickered. She had seen fire before in torches and lamps, but never like this, never free and alive in the open air. Rowan heated water in a small pot and made a simple stew with dried meat and vegetables, and they ate together as the stars began to appear overhead. "Have you ever seen stars?" Rowan asked, following her gaze upward. Grisha shook her head. I didn't know they existed until today. When the warden's wife came to the prison once, I heard her talking about them, but I thought she was speaking of something from a story. They're real, Rowan said. Each one is a light in the sky, so far away that it takes years for their glow to reach us. Some people say they're the souls of the departed, watching over us. Others say they're holes in the fabric of the heavens, letting the light of the gods shine through. I don't know what they really are, but I know they're beautiful. Everything is beautiful, Grisha whispered. I didn't know the world could be like this. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then he said, I'm sorry you were locked away from it for so long. No one should have to grow up the way you did. It wasn't your fault, Grisha said, though the words felt strange in her mouth. She was not used to absolving anyone of anything. Maybe not, Rowan agreed. But I'm part of the world that allowed it to happen, and that carries its own weight. They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. Rowan spread out blankets for them both, and Grisha lay down on hers, staring up at the stars until her eyes grew heavy. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind in the trees and the soft crackling of the dying fire. And for the first time in her life, she felt the kind of exhaustion that came from a full day lived rather than endured. The next morning, they rose with the sun and continued their journey. The land grew hillier, and Grisha caught glimpses of cleared fields and distant homesteads. Rowan pointed out landmarks as they rode, explaining the lay of the land, the names of the families who lived in the area, the places where the border with orc territories had once been drawn. Most of the orcs who lived here were peaceful, he told her. They traded with the human settlers, shared knowledge about the land, but there were factions on both sides who wanted conflict, and eventually that's what they got. The raids started small, retaliations for perceived slights, but they escalated. By the end, whole villages were being burned on both sides of the border. The orcs were driven back into the mountains, and the land here was declared human territory by royal decree. You think that was right? Grisha asked. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. I think war makes everyone a little bit monstrous, he said finally. I fought in those battles. I killed orcs who were trying to kill me, and I don't regret defending my life. But I also saw things that didn't sit right with me. Families driven from their homes just because of what they were. Children left orphaned, cruelty for the sake of cruelty. My brother spoke out against it, and it cost him his life. I didn't have his courage. I kept my head down and did my duty, and I've been living with that choice ever since. His voice was heavy with old pain, and Grisha found herself wanting to comfort him, though she had no idea how. You came for me, she said. That takes courage. Rowan glanced back at her, and something in his expression softened. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's just me trying to make amends for the things I didn't do when it mattered. They reached the farm in the late afternoon. It sat in a shallow valley between two hills, surrounded by fields that had been planted with wheat and barley. The house was small but sturdy, built of timber and stone, with a thatched roof and a chimney from which no smoke currently rose. A barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop and a fenced pasture where a pair of cows grazed peacefully. It was simple and remote, the kind of place that could be overlooked by the world, and Grisha felt something in her chest unclench at the sight of it. This is it, Rowan said, dismounting and offering her a hand down. It's not much, but it's home. Grisha slid down from Jasper's back and stood looking at the farm. She had never had a home, had never imagined what such a thing might look like. But this felt right somehow, quiet and safe and far from the iron bars that had defined her existence. It's perfect, she said, and she meant it. Rowan smiled, and it was the first true smile she had seen from him, unguarded and warm. Come on, Let me show you around. He led her through the house first, a small building with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above. The main room held a hearth, a rough wooden table with benches, and shelves lined with simple dishes and cooking tools. The second room was Rowan's bedroom, sparsely furnished with a bed, a chest for clothes, and little else. The loft was empty except for a few crates and a spinning wheel that looked like it had not been used in years. "You can have the loft," Rowan said. "I'll bring up a bed and some blankets, and you can arrange it however you like. It's not much, but it's private, and it stays warm from the heat of the hearth below." "It's more than I've ever had," Grisha said honestly. "Thank you." Rowan showed her the barn next, where Jasper was stabled alongside a placid old mare named Daisy. There were tools for farming, barrels of grain, and a workshop area where Rowan explained he did repairs and carpentry work during the winter months. The chickens clucked and pecked in their coop, and the cows watched them with bland curiosity from the pasture. "The work here is straightforward," Rowan said. "Tending the animals, maintaining the fields, keeping the buildings in good repair. I usually manage it on my own, but it's been hard the past few years. I hurt my back badly during the war, and some days it's worse than others. Having another pair of hands will make a real difference." "I'm strong," Grisha said. "I can learn." "I know you can," Rowan said, "and I'll teach you everything you need to know, but for today you should rest. You've been through more in the past 2 days than most people go through in a lifetime. Take some time to settle in, and we'll start fresh tomorrow." He was right. The exhaustion was catching up with her now that they had stopped moving, a bone-deep weariness that made every step feel like wading through deep water. Grisha nodded and let Rowan guide her back to the house. He brought down blankets and a straw-stuffed mattress from somewhere and helped her carry them up to the loft. By the time everything was arranged, she could barely keep her eyes open. "Sleep as long as you need," Rowan said from the base of the ladder. "I'll be here if you need anything." Grisha lay down on the mattress, and the softness of it after a lifetime on stone made her want to weep again. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and closed her eyes, and within moments, she was asleep. She dreamed of the sky. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was entirely new to Grisha. She woke each morning to the sound of Rowan moving around below, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. She would climb down from the loft, still marveling at the simple luxury of a ladder instead of bars, and join him at the table. They ate together in companionable silence, and then Rowan would outline the work for the day. At first, everything was strange and difficult. Grisha had never held a garden hoe, never milked a cow, never scattered feed for chickens. Her hands, strong from years of gripping iron bars and lifting her own weight in the small confines of her cell, were clumsy with the tools of farm life. But Rowan was patient. He showed her how to grip the hoe properly, how to approach the cows without startling them, how to collect eggs without disturbing the hens. He never grew frustrated when she made mistakes, never raised his voice or made her feel foolish. "You're doing well," he told her at the end of her first week, as they sat on the porch of the house watching the sun set. "Better than well, actually. I've known people who grew up on farms who can't work as hard as you do." Grisha ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise. "I just do what you show me." "It's more than that," Rowan insisted. "You're determined. You don't give up even when something is hard. That's a rare quality." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat together in the fading light, and Grisha let herself enjoy the simple peace of the moment. The sky was turning orange and pink, the colors she had come to associate with endings and beginnings. She still found herself staring at it often, unable to take its vastness for granted the way Rowan seemed to. "You ever get used to it?" she asked. The sky. Rowan followed her gaze upward. I suppose I did once upon a time. I grew up seeing it every day, so it just became part of the background. But watching you see it for the first time reminded me how miraculous it is. I've started looking at it differently now, with more appreciation. I'm glad, Grisha said. It would be a shame to forget how beautiful it is. Rowan looked at her then, his gray eyes thoughtful. You have a way of seeing the world that I envy. Everything is new to you, and that means you notice things the rest of us miss. It's a gift. Grisha's cheeks warmed. She was not used to being told she had gifts of any kind. I don't know about that. I feel like I'm stumbling through everything, trying to catch up to a life I should have been living all along. Maybe, Rowan allowed, but you're doing it with grace. That counts for something. The conversation lingered in Grisha's mind long after they had gone inside for the night. She lay in her loft, staring at the rafters, and thought about Rowan's words. Grace. No one had ever applied such a word to her before. She was an orc, a creature that humans saw as monstrous and savage. But Rowan did not seem to see her that way. He saw something else, something she was only beginning to glimpse in herself. As the weeks passed, Grisha grew stronger and more confident. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that enduring captivity had never been. She could see the results of her labor in the neat rows of the garden, in the healthy animals, in the repairs she helped Rowan make to the barn roof. Her body, which had been pale and weak from lack of sunlight and proper food, began to fill out with muscle. Her green skin took on a healthier hue, and her hair, which had been dull and brittle, grew thick and glossy. Rowan noticed the changes. He did not comment on them directly, but Grisha sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. She did not understand it, this feeling that came over her when his eyes lingered on her face or when their hands brushed as they worked side by side. It was not fear, though there was a kind of nervousness to it. It was something warmer, something that made her think of the sun on her skin and the way the sky looked at dawn. She told herself it was gratitude. Rowan had saved her, given her a life, and it was natural that she would feel something for him in return. But gratitude did not explain the way she found herself thinking about him when she should have been focused on her work, or the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, or the strange ache in her chest when he spoke about his past. One evening, about 2 months after she had arrived at the farm, they were working together in the garden when a rider appeared on the road. Grisha looked up, her hands stilling on the weeds she had been pulling, and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Visitors were rare, and she had learned to be wary of strangers. Rowan straightened, shading his eyes against the setting sun. "That's Marcus," he said. "One of my neighbors. He's a good man, but he fought in the war and he's got strong feelings about orcs. Let me do the talking." Grisha nodded and stepped back, positioning herself slightly behind Rowan. It was an instinctive move, seeking his protection, and she hated the way it made her feel small and helpless. But she was not foolish enough to ignore the reality of her situation. The rider drew closer, and Grisha could see that he was a man in his middle years, with a weathered face and the solid build of someone who worked the land. He rode with the ease of long practice, and when he reined in his horse near the garden, his eyes went immediately to Grisha. His expression hardened. "Rowan," he said, his voice tight. "What in the name of the gods is an orc doing on your land?" "Her name is Grisha," Rowan said calmly. "She works for me. She's here legally with the full authority of the king's decree." Marcus's jaw worked. "I don't care what the king says. Orcs don't belong here. They killed my brother 5 years ago, burned his farm to the ground. You remember that, Rowan? You were there when we buried him." "I remember," Rowan said, and there was sorrow in his voice. Your brother was a good man, and what happened to him was a tragedy. But Grisha had nothing to do with those raids. She's never even been to the borderlands until now. She was a prisoner in a human jail her entire life, locked up for being born. Marcus's eyes narrowed. That's a convenient story. It's the truth, Rowan said, his voice firm. And she's under my protection. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with the king's magistrate, but I won't have her harassed on my land. The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Grisha's heart pounded in her chest, and she fought the urge to run. She had nowhere to go, and running would only make things worse. She forced herself to stand still, her hands clenched at her sides. Finally, Marcus looked away. You're making a mistake, Rowan. People around here won't take kindly to this. You're putting a target on your back. That's my choice to make, Rowan said. Now, unless you have actual business with me, I'd appreciate it if you moved along. We've got work to finish before dark. Marcus gave Grisha one last hard look, then spurred his horse and rode off without another word. Grisha let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her legs shaking. Are you all right? Rowan asked, turning to her. I'm fine, Grisha said, though her voice was unsteady. He hates me. He hates what he thinks you represent, Rowan corrected. He doesn't know you. If he did, he'd see what I see. And what do you see? Grisha asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Rowan hesitated, and something complicated passed over his face. I see someone who's been through hell and came out the other side with kindness still intact. I see someone who works harder than anyone I've ever met, who never complains, who finds joy in things the rest of us take for granted. I see someone worth protecting. His words made Grisha's eyes sting with tears. She blinked them back, not wanting to cry in front of him again. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to thank me, Rowan said. Just keep being who you are, that's enough. But the encounter with Marcus left a shadow over the farm. Over the next few weeks, more visitors came, and none of them were friendly. A woman from a nearby homestead stopped by and told Rowan in no uncertain terms that he was a fool for sheltering an orc. A group of young men rode past on the road and shouted insults at Grisha when they saw her working in the fields. Someone left a dead chicken at the gate, its neck wrung, a clear message of intimidation. Rowan took each incident in stride, his jaw set and his eyes hard. He reported the harassment to the local magistrate, who promised to look into it but did nothing. He reinforced the locks on the barn and the house, and he started carrying his sword whenever they left the property. He never once suggested that Grisha should leave, but she could see the toll it was taking on him, the way his shoulders stayed tight and his sleep grew restless. She hated being the cause of his trouble. She hated that her presence, which had brought her such joy and freedom, was making his life harder. One night, as they sat by the fire after a particularly difficult day, she finally voiced the thought that had been gnawing at her. Maybe I should go, she said quietly. Find somewhere else to live, somewhere further from the border. You don't deserve to be punished for helping me. Rowan looked at her sharply. Is that what you want, to leave? No, Grisha admitted, but what I want doesn't matter if staying here is going to ruin your life. You're not ruining my life, Rowan said, his voice fierce. Those people out there, they're the ones who are choosing to make this hard. They're the ones who can't let go of their hate. I won't let them drive you away, Grisha. I won't let them win. But why? Grisha asked, her frustration boiling over. Why does this matter so much to you? You barely know me. I'm just some orc you took pity on. Why are you willing to fight the whole world for me? Rowan stared at her, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he set down the cup he had been holding and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of deep emotion. Because you're not just some orc, he said finally, his voice rough. You're Grisha. You're the person who cried when you saw the sky for the first time. You're the person who thanks me every time I teach you something new, even though you don't owe me gratitude. You're the person who looks at the world like it's a gift, even after everything that's been done to you. You're. He stopped, his jaw working as if the words were fighting him. You're important to me, more important than I expected, more important than I probably should admit. Grisha's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What are you saying? Rowan met her eyes, and there was a vulnerability in his gaze that she had never seen before. I'm saying that somewhere along the way I started to care about you. Not as a responsibility, not as someone I'm obligated to protect, but as someone I want in my life. Someone I look forward to seeing every morning. Someone who makes this farm feel less like a place I'm hiding and more like a home. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying and more precious than anything Grisha had ever been given. She did not know how to respond, did not have the language for the storm of emotions that was tearing through her. All she knew was that she felt the same way, had felt it for weeks without understanding what it meant. I care about you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm supposed to, or if it's allowed, or if it even makes sense. But I do. You're the first person who ever saw me as something other than a monster. You're the first person who ever gave me a reason to hope. Rowan's expression softened and he reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the bench between them. Can I? He asked, and the question was so gentle, so respectful that it made Grisha's throat tighten. She nodded and Rowan closed the distance, his fingers curling around hers. His hand was warm and calloused, and the simple touch sent a shiver through her entire body. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding each other's hands and letting the weight of their confessions settle into something real. From that night on, things between them shifted. The work continued. The harassment from the neighbors did not stop, but there was a new understanding between Grisha and Rowan, a connection that ran deeper than employer and employee, deeper even than friendship. They did not speak of it often, but it was there in the way Rowan's hand would linger on her shoulder when he passed her, in the way Grisha would find excuses to stand close to him, in the way they both smiled more easily when they were together. The summer turned to autumn, and the fields were harvested. Rowan taught Grisha how to preserve food for the winter, how to make cider from the apples in the small orchard behind the house, how to repair the fence that had been damaged by a storm. They worked side by side, and slowly, Grisha began to feel like she belonged, not just to the farm but to the world itself. She was no longer the girl in the cell. She was Grisha and she was free, but freedom, she was learning, came with its own dangers. One cold evening in late autumn, as the first snow of the season began to fall, they heard shouting from the road. Rowan grabbed his sword and told Grisha to stay inside, but she ignored him and followed, her heart in her throat. A group of men stood at the edge of the property, torches in hand. There were 6 of them, their faces flushed with anger and drink. Grisha recognized Marcus among them, and her stomach sank. "This has gone on long enough, Rowan," Marcus called out. "We gave you a chance to do the right thing, but you didn't listen. That orc has to go." "She's not going anywhere," Rowan said, his voice like ice. "Get off my land." "We're not leaving without her," another man said, stepping forward. He was younger than Marcus, with a cruel twist to his mouth. "She's a danger to everyone in this valley." "We're not going to wait for her to murder us in our beds." "She's never hurt anyone," Rowan said. "She's been here for months, and the only violence has come from you and your friends." "Lies," the young man spat. "Orcs are all the same, they're killers. And we're going to make sure she can't hurt anyone ever again." The group began to advance, and Rowan drew his sword. The steel rang in the cold air, a sound that made Grisha's blood run cold. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, but she could not leave Rowan to face them alone. She stepped forward, positioning herself beside him. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me," Rowan said, his voice steady. "And I promise you that won't end well." The men hesitated. Rowan was a trained soldier, and even outnumbered, he was a formidable opponent. But they were drunk and anger made people stupid. The young man lunged forward, and Rowan met him with a practiced swing that sent the man's torch flying into the snow. Chaos erupted. The other men surged forward, and Rowan fought them off with a skill that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. He moved like water, his sword an extension of his arm, and within moments, two of the attackers were on the ground clutching injuries that were painful but not fatal. But there were still 4 of them, and Rowan could not hold them off forever. Grisha saw Marcus moving to flank Rowan, a heavy club in his hand. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, tackling Marcus to the ground. He shouted in surprise and tried to throw her off, but Grisha was stronger than she looked, and desperation gave her an edge. She pinned him, her hands gripping his wrists, and stared down into his shocked face. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking, "but I won't let you hurt him. Please, just stop." Marcus stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might listen. But then he spat in her face and bucked hard, throwing her off balance. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, and Marcus scrambled to his feet, the club raised high. "Marcus, no." Rowan's voice was a roar, but he was too far away, tangled with the other men. The club came down, and Grisha closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. There was a wet, meaty sound, and Marcus screamed. Grisha opened her eyes to see an arrow protruding from his shoulder, the club fallen in the snow beside him. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the edge of the property, bow in hand. It was a woman, tall and lean, with dark hair braided down her back. She knocked another arrow and aimed it at the remaining attackers, her expression cold. "The next one goes through someone's eye," she said calmly. "Leave now, or find out if I'm bluffing." The men scrambled backward, dragging Marcus with them. They fled into the darkness, their torches bobbing like fireflies, and within moments they were gone. The woman lowered her bow and walked forward, her eyes sweeping over Rowan and Grisha with a practiced assessment. "You two all right?" Rowan was breathing hard, his sword still raised. "Who are you?" "My name is Tessa Calloway," the woman said. "I'm a hunter from the northern range. I've been tracking a group of bandits through this area, and I saw your little altercation from the ridge. Figured you could use a hand." Rowan lowered his sword slowly. "You have my thanks." "I'm Rowan Sorenson, and this is Grisha. We owe you our lives." Tessa shrugged. "You owe me a warm meal and a place to sleep for the night if you're offering. It's cold out here, and I've been on the road for days." "Of course," Rowan said. "Come inside, we'll get you settled." They brought Tessa into the house, and Grisha built up the fire while Rowan fetched blankets and food. Tessa sat at the table and watched them with sharp, intelligent eyes. When they were all settled, she accepted a bowl of stew and ate with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lot of time on the trail. "So," she said after a few bites, looking at Grisha, "you're an orc." "I am," Grisha said, bracing herself for the inevitable hostility, but Tessa just nodded. "Thought so. Your skin gives it away. I've met a few orcs in my time. Good people, most of them. Better than a lot of humans I know." Grisha blinked, surprised. "You don't mind, why would I?" Tessa asked. "You didn't choose what you were born as any more than I chose to be human. What matters is what you do with it. From what I saw tonight, you were trying to protect Rowan without hurting anyone. That speaks well of you." Grisha felt warmth spread through her chest. It was rare to hear such words from a human, and coming from someone like Tessa, who seemed so confident and capable, it meant even more. Rowan explained their situation to Tessa, the harassment they had been facing, the king's decree that had granted Grisha her freedom. Tessa listened intently, her expression growing darker as the story unfolded. "You've got a problem," she said when Rowan finished. "Those men won't stop. They'll come back, probably with more people next time, and if they can't take Grisha by force, they'll try something else. Burn your fields, poison your well, hurt your animals. Fear and hate make people creative in the worst ways." "What do you suggest?" Rowan asked. Tessa leaned back in her chair, considering. "You need allies. People who will stand with you, who will make it clear that attacking you means attacking them too. There's strength in numbers." "I don't have allies here," Rowan said bitterly. "Most of my neighbors think I'm a traitor for sheltering an orc." "Then you need to look further afield," Tessa said. "I know people. Other hunters, trappers, folks who live on the fringes and don't care much for the prejudices of the settled folk. I can send word, call in some favors. It'll take time, but I can build you a network." "Why would you do that?" Grisha asked. "You don't know us." Tessa looked at her, and there was something sad and fierce in her eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be cast out for things you can't control. I had a brother who was different, who didn't fit the mold people expected. He was killed for it when he was 16. I've spent the years since trying to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else if I can help it. So yeah, I'll help you. Consider it my way of fighting back." Rowan and Grisha exchanged a glance, and Grisha saw her own hope reflected in his eyes. "We'd be grateful for your help," Rowan said. "Whatever you need from us, it's yours." Tessa stayed with them for 3 days, resting and recovering from her journey. She was easy company, quick-witted and practical, and Grisha found herself warming to the older woman quickly. Tessa treated her with casual respect, never making her feel like a curiosity or a threat, and she had a way of drawing people out with her questions that made even Grisha feel comfortable opening up. On the morning of the 4th day, Tessa saddled her horse and prepared to leave. She clasped Rowan's hand firmly and then turned to Grisha. "You take care of yourself," she said, "and take care of him too. He's one of the good ones." "I will," Grisha promised. Tessa swung into the saddle and looked down at them both. "I'll be back within a month and I'll bring friends. In the meantime, stay alert. Don't take any chances." She rode off, and Rowan and Grisha stood together, watching her disappear into the distance. When she was gone, Rowan turned to Grisha, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving the prison?" "Things were safer there in a way. At least no one was trying to hurt you." Grisha looked at him in disbelief. "Safer? Rowan, I was dying in that place. Not quickly, but slowly, day by day. I had no life there, no hope, no future. Here, even with all the danger, I have something worth protecting. I have you." The last words came out softer than she had intended, but she did not take them back. Rowan's expression shifted, his eyes darkening with emotion. "Grisha," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right moment, but I don't know if there is a right moment, so I'm just going to say it." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I love you," Rowan said. "I know it's complicated, and I know the world will fight us every step of the way, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. You've become the most important person in my life, and the thought of losing you terrifies me more than any mob or angry neighbor. I love you, and I want to build a future with you if you'll have me." Grisha's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined that anyone could love her, let alone someone like Rowan, who was kind and brave and good. But the truth of his words was written all over his face, and she could not doubt it. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I've loved you since the day you walked me outside and showed me the dawn. I just didn't know what to call it until now." Rowan closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the question was so tender, so full of respect that it made her heart ache. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her, and it was nothing like she had imagined a kiss would be. It was soft and gentle, a question rather than a demand, and she felt herself melting into it, her hands coming up to grip his coat. The world fell away, and there was only the warmth of his mouth, the steady beat of his heart against hers, the sense that she had finally found the place where she belonged. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. "We're going to make this work," Rowan said. "I don't care what it takes. We're going to build a life together, and no one is going to stop us." "Together," Grisha agreed, and the word felt like a promise, like an anchor in the storm. The weeks that followed were not easy. The harassment continued, and there were nights when Grisha lay awake in her loft, listening to the wind and wondering if this was the night the angry neighbors would return. But Rowan was always there, steady and unwavering, and knowing that he loved her gave her strength she had never known she possessed. Tessa returned as promised, and she brought allies. A grizzled trapper named Old Ben, who had lived in the mountains for 40 years and had no patience for bigotry. A pair of sisters, hunters like Tessa, who were fierce and loyal and unafraid of a fight. A young man named Peter who had been cast out by his own family for refusing to participate in the raids against the orcs. They came one by one, and they made it clear that Rowan and Grisha were under their protection. The presence of these allies changed the dynamic in the valley. The neighbors who had been so quick to threaten suddenly found themselves outnumbered, and the harassment slowed and then stopped altogether. It was not peace, not exactly, but it was a kind of fragile truce, and it was enough. Winter came in earnest, blanketing the farm in snow. Rowan and Grisha spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of his childhood, of his brother who had been killed for speaking out, of the guilt he still carried for not standing with him. She told him about her mother, the few memories she had of a woman who had tried to shield her from the cruelty of their captors, and about the dreams she had for the future. "I want to see more of the world," she said one night, her head resting on his shoulder. "I want to climb the mountains, see the ocean, visit places I've only heard about in stories, but I also want to come back here to this farm and know it's home." "We'll do all of that," Rowan promised. "We'll travel, see everything there is to see, and when we're ready we'll come home, together." As the winter deepened, Rowan began to talk about the future in more concrete terms. He spoke of expanding the farm, of building a second house where their allies could stay when they visited, of starting a community that would welcome people regardless of their race or background. And one night, as they sat by the fire, he pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and set it on the table between them. "I made this," he said, his voice nervous. "It's not much, and I know it's not traditional, but I wanted to give you something." Grisha opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a ring, carved from wood and polished to a smooth shine. It was simple but beautiful, and she could see the care that had gone into every curve and line. "Grisha," Rowan said, taking her hand, "I know we're already committed to each other, but I want to make it official. I want to marry you if you'll have me. I want to stand before the world and claim you as my wife, and I want you to claim me as your husband. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Grisha's face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Rowan slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. He pulled her into his arms and they held each other for a long time, savoring the moment. They were building something together, something that defied all the prejudice and hatred of the world, and it was real and precious and entirely theirs. The wedding took place in early spring, as the snow melted and the first green shoots began to push through the earth. Tessa officiated, standing before them in the clearing behind the house with their small group of friends gathered around. Grisha wore a simple dress that Tessa had helped her make, and Rowan wore his best shirt, cleaned and mended for the occasion. They spoke their vows in the open air, under the vast sky that had once been nothing but iron bars to Grisha. She promised to love Rowan, to stand by him through whatever came, to build a life with him that honored both their pasts and their hopes for the future. He promised the same, his voice steady and strong, and when Tessa pronounced them married, the small gathering erupted in cheers. They celebrated with a feast, simple but abundant, and as the sun set and the stars came out, Rowan took Grisha's hand and led her away from the group. They walked to the top of the hill behind the farm, where the view stretched out in all directions, and they stood together, looking at the world that was now theirs to explore. "I never imagined this," Grisha said softly. "When I was in that cell, I never dreamed that I could have this kind of life, that I could be this happy." "You deserve it," Rowan said. "You deserve all of it and more." "So do you," Grisha said, turning to face him. "You saved me, Rowan. Not just from the prison, but from the belief that I was nothing more than the bars that held me. You showed me the sky, and you showed me who I could be. I will spend the rest of my life trying to give you even a fraction of what you've given me." Rowan smiled, and it was the smile she loved best, the one that was just for her. "You already have. Just by being here, by choosing to stay, by loving me despite everything, that's more than I ever hoped for." They kissed under the stars, and the world around them was quiet and peaceful. The journey from the darkness of the prison to the light of this moment had been long and painful, but it had brought them here, to this hill, to this life, to each other. And as they stood together, Grisha knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The seasons turned, and life on the farm continued. There were challenges, of course. Some neighbors remained hostile, and there were moments when the prejudice of the world pressed in too close. But Rowan and Grisha faced each challenge together, drawing strength from their love and from the small community they had built around them. Tessa and the others visited often, bringing news and supplies and the kind of companionship that made even the hardest days bearable. In the summer, Grisha discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never imagined being a mother, had never thought she would have the chance to bring a child into the world under anything but the worst circumstances. But Rowan's reaction erased all her doubts. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure delight, and when he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. "We're going to have a family," he said, his voice full of wonder. "A real family." "Are you scared?" Grisha asked. "Terrified," Rowan admitted, "but also happier than I've ever been. We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." The pregnancy was not easy. Grisha's body, which had been shaped by years of deprivation, struggled with the demands of carrying a child. There were days when she was so exhausted she could barely move, and moments when she was gripped by fear that something would go wrong. But Rowan was there every step of the way, tending to her with a gentleness that never wavered. And Tessa came to stay at the farm as Grisha's due date approached, bringing with her knowledge of midwifery and a calm confidence that steadied them both. The baby was born on a cold night in late autumn, delivered into the world with Tessa's skilled hands and Rowan's quiet prayers. She was a girl, small but healthy, with green skin like her mother and her father's gray eyes. They named her Lena, and when Rowan placed her in Grisha's arms for the first time, Grisha wept with an emotion so profound she had no words for it. "She's perfect," Rowan said, his voice thick with tears. "She's absolutely perfect." Grisha looked down at her daughter, at the tiny face and the small hands that gripped her finger with surprising strength, and she felt something shift inside her. This child would never know the darkness of a cell. She would grow up under the open sky, surrounded by love, free to become whoever she was meant to be. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift Grisha could give her. The years that followed were full of growth and change. Lena thrived, a bright and curious child who delighted in exploring the farm and asking endless questions about everything she saw. Rowan and Grisha continued to work the land, and with the help of their friends, they expanded their small homestead into something larger and more prosperous. They built a second house, as Rowan had dreamed, and it became a refuge for others who were cast out or persecuted, a place where people could come and be safe. The neighbors gradually came to accept their presence, if not entirely embrace it. There were still those who muttered and glared, but there were also those who softened, who saw Grisha working alongside Rowan and began to question their own prejudices. Slowly, grudgingly, the community began to shift. One afternoon, when Lena was 5 years old, Grisha took her daughter's hand and walked with her to the top of the hill behind the farm. It was a clear day, and the sky stretched out above them in endless blue. Lena looked up, her eyes wide with wonder, and Grisha smiled. "You see the sky, Lena?" she asked. "I see it, Mama," Lena said. "It's so big." "It is," Grisha agreed. "I didn't see it until I was much older than you. I spent a long time trapped in a dark place, and I thought I would never know what it felt like to stand under the open sky, but your father saved me. He walked me outside at dawn and he showed me the world, and now I get to show it to you." Lena looked up at her, her small face serious. "Were you scared, Mama?" "Yes," Grisha said honestly. "I was very scared, but your father taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. And he taught me that love is the strongest thing in the world, stronger than fear, stronger than hate. That's the most important thing I want you to know." Lena nodded, and then she tugged on Grisha's hand. "Can we go tell Papa? I want to tell him I love him." "Of course," Grisha said, her heart swelling. They walked back down the hill together, hand in hand, and when they reached the farmhouse, Rowan was waiting on the porch. He scooped Lena up in his arms and listened as she babbled about the sky and the things her mother had told her. And when he met Grisha's eyes over their daughter's head, the love and gratitude in his gaze was so intense it made her breath catch. That night, after Lena was asleep in her small bed in the loft, Rowan and Grisha sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of the harvest, and the world was quiet around them. "You ever think about the prison?" Rowan asked. "Sometimes," Grisha admitted, "but it feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person. I'm not that girl anymore. I'm someone new, someone you helped me become." "You were always this person," Rowan said. "I just gave you the space to find yourself." "Maybe," Grisha said. "But I wouldn't have found it without you. You're the reason I have this life, this family. You're the reason I know what love is." Rowan pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that cell, looking at me like I was some kind of miracle, and I'll love you for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Grisha said, "more than words can say." They sat together under the stars, wrapped in the warmth of each other and the life they had built, and Grisha thought about how far she had come. From the darkness of the prison to the light of this moment. From a girl who had never seen the sky to a woman who stood beneath it every day, unafraid and free. It was a journey that had cost her much, but it had given her everything. And as she looked up at the sky, at the vast and beautiful expanse that had once been nothing but a dream, she knew that she would never take it for granted. She would treasure every sunrise, every star, every moment of the life she had been given. Because she had learned, through pain and love and Rowan's unwavering belief in her, that freedom was not just about being outside the bars. It was about being seen, being loved, and being allowed to become who you truly were. She had found all of that and more in the man sitting beside her and the life they had built together. And she knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face them together. Because that was what love meant. That was what family meant. And it was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had ever needed, and everything she would fight to protect for the rest of her days. The sky above them was full of stars, each one a point of light in the darkness, and Grisha smiled. She had spent so long in the dark, but now she lived in the light. And it was beautiful beyond measure. Years passed, and the farm became a beacon for those who needed refuge. Word spread slowly but steadily about the place on the border where an orc woman and a human man had built a life together, where prejudice was met with quiet resistance, and love was stronger than hate. More people came, some to stay, others just passing through, and each one added to the tapestry of the community that was growing around the small farmhouse. Lena grew into a strong and confident young woman, her mother's determination and her father's kindness blending into something entirely her own. She had her mother's green skin and small tusks, her father's gray eyes, and a spirit that refused to be constrained by the prejudices of others. She worked the farm alongside her parents, and she also began to venture further, traveling to nearby towns and villages to trade and to speak about the life her family had built. She became, in her own way, a bridge between worlds. People who would never have listened to Grisha listened to Lena, because she was young and passionate and impossible to ignore. She spoke of her mother's story, of the prison and the sky and the man who had given them both a second chance. She spoke of the community that had grown up around the farm, of the people of all races and backgrounds who had found a home there. And slowly, grudgingly, people began to listen. Not everyone, of course. There were still those who clung to their hatred, who saw orcs as irredeemable monsters and humans who befriended them as traitors. But the tide was turning, inch by painful inch, and Grisha could see the change happening in her lifetime. One summer evening, when Lena was 20 and had just returned from a trip to the capital, she came running up to the farmhouse with news that made Grisha's heart leap. "The king is issuing a new decree," Lena said, breathless with excitement. "He's ordering the release of all orcs held in prisons without trial, and he's creating a commission to investigate abuses against orc populations. Mama, this is what you fought for. This is what you and Papa have been working toward all these years." Grisha looked at Rowan, and she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Joy, relief, and a bittersweet sadness for all the years that had been lost before this moment could come. "It's a start," she said. "It's not the end, but it's a start." "It's more than a start," Rowan said. "It's proof that change is possible, that the work we've done here matters." That night, they gathered their friends and neighbors, the ones who had stood with them through the hardest times, and they celebrated. Tessa was there, older now but still fierce, and she raised a toast to Grisha and Rowan that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Old Ben told stories of the early days, when they had first come together to protect the farm, and the sisters laughed and sang songs that filled the night with joy. As the party wound down and the guests began to drift away, Grisha and Rowan found themselves alone once more, standing on the hill behind the farm under a sky full of stars. It had become their place, the spot where they came to mark the important moments of their lives, and tonight was no exception. "Do you remember the day we met?" Rowan asked. "Every detail," Grisha said. You walked into that cell and you looked at me like I was a person, not a monster. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me purpose, Rowan said. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, trying to atone for the things I hadn't done. But you showed me that it's never too late to make a difference. You showed me what real courage looks like. We've come a long way, Grisha said, leaning into him. We have, Rowan agreed, and we're not done yet. There's still so much to do, so much to fight for, but I'm glad I get to do it with you. Always, Grisha said, for as long as we both live. They stood together, wrapped in each other's arms, and looked out at the land they had claimed and the life they had built. It was not a perfect life. There were still struggles, still moments of pain and fear. But it was theirs, earned through love and sacrifice, and an unwavering belief that the world could be better than it was. And as Grisha looked up at the sky, at the stars that had become as familiar to her as the bars of her cell had once been, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had been raised in darkness, but she had found the light. She had been told she was a monster, but she had proven she was so much more. And she had been given the gift of love, the kind of love that changed everything, that made even the impossible possible. She thought of the girl she had been, the frightened child huddled in the corner of a cold cell, counting stones and dreaming of things she had no words for. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right. That one day a man with gray eyes and a kind heart would walk into her life and change it forever. She wished she could tell her that she would see the sky, that she would know love, that she would build a family and a home and a future worth living. But she could not go back. All she could do was move forward, holding tight to the people she loved and the life she had fought so hard to claim. And that, she knew, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The stars shone down on them and the night was full of promise. Rowan's hand was warm in hers and the farm stretched out below them, a testament to everything they had overcome. Grisha closed her eyes and breathed in the cool night air, and she felt grateful beyond measure for the journey that had brought her here. She had been raised in a human prison, had never seen the sky, had never known kindness or hope. But Rowan had walked her outside at dawn, and in that moment, everything had changed. He had shown her a world she had never imagined, and together they had built a life that was richer and more beautiful than anything she could have dreamed. And now, standing on this hill under the endless sky, with the man she loved beside her and the future stretching out before them, Grisha knew that she was finally, truly free. Not just from the bars of the prison, but from the chains of fear and doubt and self-hatred that had bound her for so long. She was free, and she was loved, and she was home. And that was the greatest gift of all. The dawn came again, as it always did, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Grisha stood on the porch with Rowan, watching the sun rise, and she thought about how many dawns she had missed in the darkness of the prison. But she was not angry anymore, not bitter. She was simply grateful for the dawns she had now, for the ones that stretched out ahead of her, for the chance to greet each new day with hope and love. "Thank you," she said to Rowan, her voice soft in the early morning quiet. "For what?" he asked. "For everything," she said. "For seeing me. For believing in me. For walking me outside at dawn and showing me that the world could be beautiful. For loving me when no one else would. For giving me a life." Rowan turned to her, and there were tears in his eyes. "You don't need to thank me. You gave me just as much as I gave you. You taught me what it means to be brave, to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. You taught me that love is worth fighting for. You gave my life meaning, Grisha. I should be thanking you." "Then we'll thank each other," Grisha said, smiling through her own tears. "And we'll keep building this life together, one day at a time." "One day at a time," Rowan agreed. They stood together on the porch, hand in hand, watching the sun climb higher into the sky. The world was waking around them, birds singing in the trees, the animals stirring in the barn, the first hints of warmth beginning to chase away the morning chill. It was a new day, full of possibility, and they would face it together. Just as they had faced every day since the moment Rowan had walked into that prison cell and changed both their lives forever. Just as they would face every day to come, for as long as they both lived. Because they were partners, bound by love and commitment and a shared belief that the world could be better, kinder, more just. And in their small corner of that world on a farm at the edge of the frontier, they were proving that belief true. One sunrise at a time. Grisha tightened her grip on Rowan's hand and he squeezed back, a silent promise that needed no words. They had come so far, overcome so much, and they would continue to do so. Together. Always together. The sky stretched out above them, vast and beautiful and full of promise. And Grisha, who had once known only darkness, stood beneath it and smiled. She was free, she was loved, and she was exactly where she was meant to be, home.